Well, we were facing in 1816 this textile industry which has just gotten started. And the mills are brand new, and there's a couple of them around, and they're building more. The industry is just getting started, but it depends on no English competition. It depends on the fact that England is not selling their products in the American market. And suddenly, when the war is over, then they can. So the American textile industry is facing oblivion. So what do? Well, if you remember from last week, if you're still able to kind of put things together, what they do is, I already sort of gave you the answer, they go to Congress and they say, help us, help us, help us. And what Congress did was to pass the Tariff of 1816. The Tariff of 1816, which imposed high tariffs on the import of textiles and other manufactured goods. There's a range of other activities. I've only talked about textiles in this class because that's the main one, but all sorts of small industries have just gotten started. Economists call this infant industries because they're new. They only got started during that 10-year decade that I talked about from 1805 to 1815. They're just getting started. They're small. They're very fragile. They only exist because they don't have to face English competition, and when English competition comes back, then they're up against it. They're likely to fail. So Congress passes them. This is now the Republicans in Congress who, as I said, are now going to come to say, we really should have some manufacturing in this country. Let's protect it. Let's pass tariffs so we can continue to have manufacturing. So Congress imposes high tariffs on cotton goods, on all kinds of textiles. And there's still a certain amount of wool being used for the textile industry. But whatever, it's all going to be protected now by tariffs so that the American industry can survive in the face of English competition. And it's the Republicans who push this through as part of sort of their, sometimes I call them the new Republicans. They're not the same as the old Jeffersonian Republicans who said the United States should remain a nation of small farmers in order to protect our Republican government. No, now Republicans are saying, maybe we should have some manufacturing in this country. Maybe we should protect our manufacturers. Maybe we should encourage them. So they're including tariffs as sort of a new Republican program. So that's going to be one of the main acts passed by Congress in 1816 as sort of the aftermath of the War of 1812. I talked about the general context, if I can remind you of this, is we're looking at what happens in the country as a consequence, as an aftermath of the War of 1812. And one of the things that happened was we decided we should protect some of our manufacturing, the manufacturing that had been able to get a little foothold, just a little start, infant industries. They're just starting during those years when American manufacturers didn't have to worry about English competition because of political reasons, because of the embargo or the orders in council or the war itself. It's up and down, but just rocky periods there. So trade was always down, so that enabled American manufacturers to get started. Now, the tariff was kind of a geographic issue. It's politically a little bit dicey. In the Northeast, the political support for the tariff is mixed. Some people in the Northeast favored manufacturing, and so they're pro-tariff. But there are other politicians, other congressmen and so forth from the Northeast who say, wait a minute, we're traditionally been a trading area. This is where the trade has gone on. This is where our exports go and our imports come in. If we start imposing tariffs, it's going to cut down on our imports of manufactured goods from England. It's going to cut down on our trade, and it's going to hurt our merchants. So there were people in New England who were anti-tariff. The New England, or the Northeast, is kind of divided between people who are supporting manufacturing and people who are supporting the merchants and trade. And so the Northeast is kind of divided. The vote on the tariff of 1815 was divided between those who favored the sort of the older economy, the old merchant economy, the trade economy, and those who were favoring the new rising manufacturing class and are pro-industry, pro-tariff. The West was almost entirely pro-tariff. If you just look at the vote in Congress on the tariff of 1816, as I said, if you looked at the congressmen from the Northeast, it's sort of evenly divided between those who are pro-tariff and those who are anti-tariff. The West is almost entirely pro-tariff because not only do they have to import goods, they have to transport them from the port all the way out to the West. So they want to see manufacturing in the country. Now the textile industry isn't going to go out in the West, but other industries would. And that means the industry would be local, it would be close, it would provide jobs in the local community. And so they want to see manufacturing here and not depend on English imports, because English imports come to the port, they go to the Atlantic coast, and it's not easy to get them out to the West. So if people in the West need manufactured goods, they figure, hey, it's better if we manufacture them ourselves. So let's have some tariffs to protect manufacturing. And as I say, this doesn't apply to the big case of tariffs, of textiles, but it applies to other manufacturing. So there's other manufacturing that is going to start up in the West, and the West is going to be pro-tariff. Now the South, though, is going to be overwhelmingly anti-tariff, because the South is still going to be agricultural. They're not going to have industries down there. They're not going to have manufacturing. And that means they're not going to benefit from the tariffs, but they're going to have to start buying products from American manufacturers, and those products are going to cost more because American manufacturers can afford to charge more because they don't have to worry about English competition. English products the price of English goods will go up a lot because of the tariff, but that means that English goods will cost more, and then American goods can cost more too because American manufacturers can charge more, and they can afford to be in business, and Southern consumers are going to have to pay higher prices for manufactured goods. So they're opposed to tariffs, with an interesting exception. The exception is the state of South Carolina. The South is almost unanimously anti-tariff in the vote on the tariff of 1816. But kind of curiously, South Carolina is pro-tariff. I think about, well, what's this all about? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And at a certain level it doesn't. But it's true. So we have to explain why. Remember the reasons I gave you why the early textile industry got started in New England and not in the South. And some of you may have been wondering, wait a minute. Does that really apply to all of the South? And it does to all of the South, except South Carolina. See, South Carolina has about the only city in the South. In the colonial days, our major cities are all in the north. They're Boston, Philadelphia, New York, then more recently Baltimore, sort of secondarily Wilmington, Delaware, Newport, Rhode Island, Salem, Massachusetts. The cities are all in the north. In the South, there are no cities. Big plantations along the rivers handled all of the commerce. There are no cities, except Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina was a long-time center of trade, especially trade with the West Indies because it's the closest. It's the furthest city. In the South, it's the most southerly city. Of all of our major cities, it's the only one in the South. So they were closer to the West Indies, so they did a lot of trade there. There's a lot of capitalists, if you will, in Charleston, people who are like Lowell in Boston. They've been engaged in trade for a couple of generations. They have accumulated cash, they've accumulated financial reserves. They have capital to invest in the textile mills. So that's an issue, but South Carolina says, well, it's okay for us. Yeah, the rest of the South doesn't have capital, but we do. And then I talked about labor. Well, some of you may have thought to yourselves, wait a minute, what's this about teenage girls working in textile mills in New England? What about slaves? South Carolina says, hey, they may have teenage girls, but we've got slaves. So we've got cheap labor too. We've got cheaper labor than teenage girls. We've got forced labor. We can match New England in capital. We've got the same capital that they do, and we can match them with slave cheap labor. So we've got it. And then there's the issue of the power to run the machines. As I said, almost all of the power for the textile industry and actually many other industries, most of the power that's being generated in this country to run machinery is run by water power. But people in South Carolina say, wait a minute, this is 1815. There's steam engines. The steam engine had been invented in England by a guy named James Watt back around the 1790s. Steam technology is still being developed. It's still very primitive. It doesn't work very well. It's not very reliable. There's all kinds of problems with it. But people can see we're going to solve those problems. We're going to be able to use steam engines. And steam engines are going to be better than water mills because you can build a steam engine anywhere. The water mills have to go someplace where there's a waterfall. You can only build a textile mill on a river, and it has to be a river that has some falls along it. It can't be like the Charles River. By the time the Charles River gets down to Boston, it's flowing very levelly and it's very slow, and there's no way to build a water mill in Boston. You've got to go up into the boonies, and even then you've got to find a spot where there's a place to locate a water mill. You can build a steam engine, you can put a steam engine anywhere in the world. So, South Carolinians say, in 1860, as the tariffs are being debated and it's being voted on in Congress, they say, well, at this point, we don't have any textile mills in the South. All of the textile mills that are being built, and they're just getting started, all of the early textile mills are located up in New England where there's water mills and where there's lots of cheap labor from teenage girls and where there's capitalists with money to invest, like the Boston Associates to invest in the water mills. But we've got them. We've got the same advantages they have. We can get cheaper labor than they can. We don't have to have the high turnover in labor. The textile mills of the North, the poor owners, they had to recruit constantly because girls they'll work there for a couple of years, they'll get married, they'll go off, and you have to keep constantly recruiting you have to constantly get new labor coming in to keep your mills running. We won't have that problem. We'll just have slaves, it'll work better, it'll be cheaper. We're going to be able to have better labor, cheaper labor than they have in the North. So we're going to take advantage of that. And we're going to have better power. We're going to have steam engines. They aren't quite ready yet, but we're going to work it out. We're going to get engineers to solve some of these technological problems with steam engines, and we're going to get them to work, and it's going to be a lot better. And so we're going to have everything better than they do. And we've got the raw material right here. The cotton is grown in South Carolina. Those poor textile makers up there in New England, they have to schlep all that cotton up there, and it's expensive because cotton is big, bulky, and heavy, and expensive to transport. They have to ship it all the way up there. Then they have to take it by sailboat from Charleston to Boston, and then on Boston they have to put it on some sort of a barge or something and haul it up the river, and it's hard to get it up there. We'll just grow it right next door. It'll be right here. And so we're going to become the center of the textile industry. So, hey, we're supporting the tariff. We're going to benefit it. Right now, there's no textile mills, but we're going to have them. We are going to be in Charleston. We are going to become the center of the textile industry. And so let's support the tariff. So South Carolina is sort of out of sync with the rest of the South. The other South, they're all opposed to the tariff. They don't have textile mills. They're not any. There's no way that they're going to have textile mills. There's no capital there. Yeah, they've got the slaves, and they could build the steam engines, but they're just not interested in that. But South Carolina figures we're going to be the center. So South Carolina votes unanimously. All of their congressmen, all of the members of the House, their 2 senators, all supported the tariff of 1816. Now, that's one of the big issues that the Republicans are pushing, tariffs to promote manufacturing. They also look at, as another issue, another consequence of the war, is that people now said, you know what, it was a mistake to let the Bank of the United States go out of business in 1811, just before the war. We need a bank. We need banking to provide a sound source of money, and we need a bank to provide a monetary system to promote this modern industrial economy that we're starting to build here. We're just starting, and we've only got very little bit to show for it, but to get further, we need to have a modern banking system. So, they also adopt, as part of their whole new program of being pro-industry, the Republicans are going to support a second Bank of the United States. That'll be another thing passed in 1816. The Republicans passed 2 major pieces of legislation that are sort of out of sync for them. They're kind of contrary to classical Jeffersonian Republican principles, but they passed the tariff of 1816, and they passed the second Bank of the United States, largely on the same basis as the first one. The leader of the Republicans in Congress by this time is going to be a member of Congress who's going to become very famous, and we'll be hearing a lot about him. His name was Henry Clay. Henry Clay had gotten his start in Congress as one of the war hawks. He was one of those early Republicans who'd come to Congress back in 1810. By 1816, he's sort of become the acknowledged leader of the Republican Party, especially sort of the new wing of the Republican Party, the pro-industry, the pro-bank, the pro-modern wing of the Republicans. He's from Kentucky, so he's not in a northern state. It's on the border. Technically, Kentucky was a slave state, but it was not a cotton state, so it doesn't have that many slaves. I'll talk about that issue a little bit more later. And Henry Clay is pushing what he's going to call the American system. The American system. And his idea is we're going to become self-reliant, independent of England economically. We're going to produce for ourselves. We're going to grow our own cotton for our own textile mills. That's why we're going to be pro-tariff. We're going to have our own banking system. That's why he's advocating the second Bank of the United States. And he's putting this into a package that he calls the American system. There's one more component of that I'll have to talk about in a few minutes.